Okay, before we go any further into the series, we're going to do some more investigative deep dives on certain subjects as I feel they are important. So I got a DM shortly after my YouTube video posted and was like, hey, could you actually talk about these four specific groups of the POC community during that time period, what happened to them? And I did. I want you to know I did my research, so let me know this is what you were thinking. I know you want to remain anonymous, but yes, we need to talk about this. Because in episode 2, we established that the American dream was real for what? 28 years, roughly from 1945 to 1973. We already covered that. And I showed you even specific policies that created that prosperity. We went over the GI Bill, how strong unions were at the time, how affordable the housing was based on your income level and what you're bringing in, and then government investment in working people, right? But here's the question that I didn't fully answer in episode 2, and the person who DM'd me was correct. Who was it real for? Like, who really was it? Because here's what the history looks like and what they left out of our history books in class, out of most American classrooms growing up when we were learning this history. So while one group of Americans was using the GI Bill to buy homes and will go to college and build generational wealth, the federal government was, well, running documented programs, by the way, specifically designed to make sure that what? Other Americans cannot do the same thing. And we are going to talk about this. It's not individual racism or an isolated incident at all. Like, this is literally documented federal policy with names attached to it, with dates attached to it, and when they were implemented, along with paper trails that anyone can follow, okay? And I'm going to actually get a website up and running, because that was another DM I got, was, hey, can we maybe possibly get, like, a website so we can look at the evidence? Sure, I'm working on that for you guys. But this episode is specifically about those policies, so it's a little mini deep dive. And we're going to cover 4 specific groups during that time period: Black Americans, Native Americans, Japanese Americans, and Latino Americans. Because those 4 groups were some of the most hugely oppressed by federal policy during that time period. And so for each group, I'm going to show you kind of the specific documented federal policies that ran during the exact same years the dream was supposedly available to everyone, okay? So here's what I kind of need from you to understand before we go further. So the wealth gaps we see today, right, between white Americans and non-white Americans did not happen by accident or because of cultural differences, okay? They did not happen because some groups were working harder than others. That's not why this happened. They happened because of specific documented decisions made by federal government, okay? During the exact years prosperity was being built, the American dream. So that's not my opinion here. This is a federal record that any of us can look up. And it matters actually right now in 2026 more than I kind of realized when I started this series. Because the same voices telling you to blame the immigrants and welfare recipients are the same exact voices that have never once asked what? You to look at these documents. But I'm going to, and ask yourself why I'm asking you to look at these documents. So let's just get into it, okay? And like I said, I'll have that up. I'm hoping by episode 3 release, I will have that website functional, and I'll have it kind of separated by episode and then the documents in those episodes. But let's start with the Black Americans, because the documented history here is specific for that group. It has dates, it has numbers, and it connects directly to the wealth gap we are still living with today in 2026, okay? So I've already established in episode 2 that the GI Bill, like I said, was transformative. It built generational wealth. It gave money in Americans' pockets that were coming back from the war. Let's go over the facts real quick. 8 million veterans used education benefits, 4.3 million home loans, worth about $33 billion were handed out. An entire middle class was built on that foundation. Okay, but here is what I did not really fully say in episode 2. And because of that DM, I'm going to. 1.2 Black Americans served in World War II. 1.2 million. In segregated units, mind you, fighting for a country that never even treated them as equals to begin with and still doesn't. And when they came home, the GI Bill was supposed to reward their service, right? And was administered in a way that shut, though, most of them out entirely. I went over that in episode 2. But let's kind of dig into how that actually worked. So the GI Bill's language did not explicitly exclude Black veterans, okay? On paper, it applied to everyone, or at least it looked like it did. But the administration of the benefits was left to the local offices, who were mostly run by white officials and were mostly in the South. And those officials denied Black veterans their loans. Someone needs to be slapped upside the head, in my opinion. Anyway, denied them access to universities, and then steered them away steered them away from suburbs being built with federal money. Ask yourselves why. But let me give you some specific numbers, because in 13 Mississippi cities in 1947, there were 3,200 VA guaranteed home loans issued. How many went to black veterans? Just take a guess. 3,200. 2 loans out of 3,200. We are not bad enough. And like I mentioned in episode 2, in New York and New Jersey, combined the first 67,000 mortgages issued in the GI Bill went to white families, and only 100 went to non-white families out of that 67,000. 100. Okay? That is not individual racism, you guys, playing out randomly here. That's not what that is. This is a documented systemic, pattern across the entire country and our history. But let's talk about redlining specifically, okay? And before you ask, what do you know about all this, and this group? Well, my best friend growing up, she was black, okay? I was the white kid in a prominently black neighborhood that would walk with my friend and her older brother who make sure we get to the corner store. And yes, there were corner stores. I call them corner stores. I don't know what the hell this damn regime is talking about when it comes to corner stores, but that's a corner store. If it's on the corner, it's a corner store. So I grew up walking, and I'm very, very white. Okay? I mean, that's pretty obvious here. Okay? I'm blonde hair, blue eyes, white. And so cops were called quite a bit on us because there's a little white girl walking with an older black teenager and my best friend. And, and a lot of the parents never held back when I had questions, because I had questions, and I asked those questions from a young age of 3-4 years old upwards. And I know about redlining. I am very well versed in that history because I thankfully had friends' parents who were willing to teach me. Okay? And how did I meet these friends? Well, my mom drove a bus in Minneapolis, so when I didn't have my kindergarten and first grade were kind of alternating days at the time, so I'd go with my mom part of the time. And then my dad was a estimator for a fence company in Minneapolis, and he was the only fence estimator that was willing to go into those neighborhoods because he wasn't scared, because he knew most of the people there. We went to barbecues 24/7, okay? We were invited. Okay, and I know it's weird to say that, but there's still people down in Minneapolis today that remember my father and the amazing work he did. And what I'm trying to hopefully do is be that ally and wake white people up. My job here is not to talk over the POC community voices. My job is to speak directly to white people and get you all to wake the hell up that are not woken up yet, because this is not individual racism. But back to redlining. So that's my my credentials on what I know about when it comes to the black community, because this is also the other piece of the puzzle when it comes to redlining. Redlining was not invented after the GI Bill. Do you know when redlining started? In 1933. So the federal government created an agency called Homeowners Loan Corporation, okay? And that agency created maps of cities across America. And so they color-coded neighborhoods, right? Green meant what? That the neighborhood was a good investment. So what do you think red meant? It meant it was too risky to lend money there. That's what it meant. And the criteria, what do you think the criteria was for being marked red? The race of the people who live there, who were prominently black neighborhoods, they were automatically marked red. And I'm seeing red thinking about it because this is an issue close to my heart, because I love my friends. And considering a lot of my friends are a part of the POC community across the board, and especially these 4 groups I'm talking about in this video today, I mean, I got so pissed off during history class too when my teachers would purposely skip over the details of something like this, and I was the one that usually got kicked out of class or told basically to sit down and shut up. And it's we should be learning this. And instead, my friends' parents had to teach me these things. Anyways. Our education system is broken. It's been broken. We all know this. But moving on. This meant that banks, though, could not get federal backing for loans in the red-marked neighborhoods, which meant black families were what? Could not get mortgages there, which meant black families could not what? Build equity like white families could. They could not build generational wealth like white families could. So while white families were using federally backed loans to what? Buy homes in new suburbs that were what? Rising in value every single year, only 2% of the $120 billion in new housing subsidized by the federal government, okay, between 1934 and 1962 went to non-white family. 2% of $120 billion. And there's an NPR article on that you can look up too. But like I said, all that website up and running hopefully by episode 3. But here's what actually all this means, like in plain language breakdown. So home ownership is the primary way that American families build generational wealth. You buy a house. It goes up in value over decades. You pass that wealth to your children, generational wealth, right? So then your children have a financial foundation that you never had. And that is how generational wealth works. Okay, it's a pretty easy system when it comes to like how to explain it. White families were literally handed access to that system through federal policies, while black families were locked out of that same system through federal policy. So black veterans who did manage to receive GI benefits received only roughly about 40% of what white veterans received. 40%. Adjusted for inflation, that difference amounted to roughly $170K per veteran. $170K per veteran. Multiply that across 1.2 million black veterans during that time period, and that is the documented origin of the racial wealth gap we are still talking about in 2026. It's not cultural differences, it's not work ethic either. It's not any of the explanations you hear on cable news. It's federal policy. It's documented with maps, with numbers, with colors, with names attached. And I'm going to mess up this historian's name, and I'm so sorry, but Ira Connelson wrote that there was no greater instrument for widening an already huge racial gap in post-war America than the GI Bill. And that is from a documented academic study, by the way. It's not like my opinion. It's not a feeling or a woke vibe from me. This is a documented conclusion based off federal records. And I want to see one more thing before we move to the next group that was affected during this time. Black Americans have literally been screaming this for generations, off rooftops, in our ears, in loud phones. They have it documented, you guys. They have written about it. They have fought to have it acknowledged. So we as white people need to acknowledge their suffering, because our federal government has oppressed them because they are not white. And you may think, well, it's not my problem. I wasn't in charge of the policies back then. Okay, so be a part of the damn solution. Be a part in not talking over them and instead raising their voices. Let's get this done. Because if a bunch of us white people put our heads together and helped our allies, our neighbors, our brothers and sisters, okay, we could maybe get somewhere. Not maybe, we could. And that's kind of what my job is here. I realize I need to teach about this because a lot of people are not understanding. And my job is not to speak for that experience, though. Okay? So my job is to make sure that everyone watching this, especially you white people, understand that the system that excluded black Americans is the same exact system that's now failing all of us, regardless of skin color. We are not on opposite sides, you guys. We are literally being divided on purpose so that we would fight each other, right? Just fight. Instead of looking at the people who, drew the red lines. Now let's talk about Native Americans. And yes, I had Native American friends. My daughter is half Native American. Okay, she's even enrolled in the Navajo tribe. I'll put it that way. So I do know a lot about Native American history, because what the federal government did to Native communities during this exact same year as the American dream was being built for white families is one of the most documented and least discussed chapters in all of American history, and we're going to dive into that. And it has a specific name. Do you know what that name is? Termination. So we're going to go back in time to 1953. The same year that union membership was at its peak, actually. The same years white families were buying homes and building generational wealth through the GI Bill, right? Yes. So on August 1st, 1953, the United States Congress passed House Concurrent Resolution 108. The document is in the National Archives. You can look it up. Anyone can read it right now, today. In plain language, though, it said the federal government intended to terminate its relationship with Native American tribes as quickly as possible. Okay, so let's break down what that and what termination means and what it actually meant and looked like in real life. Because the language of the resolution sounded almost reasonable at first, okay? It talked about making Native Americans subject to, the same laws as other citizens, right? and giving them the same rights. Sorry, there is something flying outside my car. It's bucking the crap out of me. Anyway, the same responsibilities. It was framed as a liberation for Native Americans. It was not liberation, newsflash, in case you needed to hear that. So here is what termination actually did do. So between 1953 and 1964, the government terminated recognition of more than 100 tribes and bands as sovereign nations. These actions affected roughly about 12,000 Native Americans. Approximately 2.5 million acres of trust land was removed from protected status. CNN did do an article on that it should be easily searchable. But let me put this in plain language for you. The federal government dissolved over 100 tribal governments, took 2.5 million acres of protected land from Native Americans, and then ended federal support for healthcare, education, utilities, police, and fire departments on reservations. That is what the termination did, all during the peak years of the American dream. Okay, so given the considerable geographic isolation of many reservations and inherent economic problems, not many tribes had the funds to do what? To continue such services after termination was implemented. And I believe CNN did a separate article on that specifically. So communities that were already economically isolated suddenly had no health care. Okay, they had no schools. They had no utilities, no law enforcement, while white families next door were using federal programs to buy homes and send their kids to college and to school across the country. Then came the relocation program. The Bureau of Indian Affairs began a relocation program in 1948. So by 1960, total, I believe, from what I saw last as reported facts that were not inflated and not being contested, was 33,466 Native Americans have been relocated from the communities of cities such as Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, Cleveland, and Seattle. The government promised housing assistance and employment help in these cities. Do you think they received that? Because what Native Americans actually found was what? Unemployment, discrimination, and poverty, and the destruction of cultural and community ties that had sustained their people for generations before this. So, Native Americans who made the move to cities struggled to adjust to life in a metro area and faced unemployment, low-end jobs, discrimination, homesickness, and loss of traditional cultural supports. And I believe Security Council report does have a report out on that one. But now I want to connect something very specific here, because this does directly connect to the reservation land and, well, tribal sovereignty today. Okay? So the GI Bill that we discussed, the one that built the white middle class, had a specific problem for Native veterans. Very specific. So the VA guaranteed loans for Native American veterans as they did for others, but these benefits did not apply to property on the reservations. Because of the Bureau of Indian Affairs refused to waive the title to reservation land as property of the federal government, Native veterans could then in return not use their GI Bill benefits to build homes on their own tribal land. So let that sink in for just a moment, okay? A Native American veteran who served his country could not use his GI Bill benefit to build a home on the land his tribe had lived on for generations because the federal government wanted to control that land through the BIA, and the BIA refused to release it to the federal government, and it was a whole issue. And to this day, sovereignty land is still an issue with our federal government and policies. But here's what the documented record tells us about why this was happening. What's the why behind it? So I believe it was on CBS. There's a speaking on. Sorry, I had a weird microphone issue. So back to what I was saying. So speaking on CBS during this time period, one observer gave a blunt explanation for what was behind the termination. On a lot of Native American land, there is oil. On a lot of Native American land, there used to be thought that in the desert there was a lot of uranium, which was true. Okay. I want to be honest about that here. I used to live on the Navajo reservation. I worked with the natives, and the family I stayed with was getting checks from the federal government still to this day for the uranium mine they opened up on their land and then just left. Very irresponsible about it. So that part I can at least attest with my own eyes. I saw it. But the Native Americans owned a lot of valuable timber as well. So there was a lot of reasons why it would be very convenient to liberate, Native Americans so that they had no protection and nobody to defend their rights. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's a documented statement from that period. So, about the documented resources. So, on documented tribal land specifically, the termination policy itself was officially ended in 1975, but the damage to tribal sovereignty, land ownership, healthcare, education, economic development that happened between 1953 and 1975 does not simply reverse when a policy ends. The damage was still done. The communities that lost 2.5 million acres of land during those boom years did not get that land just back. That's why they say it's stolen land and no one is illegal on stolen land. This is what we are talking about. So the healthcare infrastructure that was dismantled was not rebuilt overnight. And even to this day, like on the Navajo reservation, like I believe it's called Indian Health Services, like the hospital they go to. Was it in Winslow or Holbrook? I'm trying to remember. But like the lines were long. It was so long to just get seen. Like, you would have to spend an entire day there. So instead of going in for like a couple hours to your doctor appointment, you're spending your entire day there. It was like that about a decade ago. I don't know if it's gotten any better, but I would guess not, considering our federal government. But with that being said, the generational wealth that was never built during those years cannot be just created retroactively to them. And so the Native veterans who could not use their GI Bill benefits to build homes on their own tribal land never got the opportunity back either. They didn't. It was gone. So this is documented federal policy. Running during the exact same years the American dream was, well, being built for everyone else that was white. Now we're going to get into Japanese Americans, and I'm going to do my best here, because the story has a specific document at its center, and my nieces are both half Japanese. One of my older brothers, he has 2 daughters. And so I'm pretty well versed on this as well, because his wife has made it known when I ask my questions exactly what happened, and I appreciate the hell out of her for that. So I know more than probably the average white person on this as well, and again, I'm not trying to overstep or overtalk anybody in that community. I'm just trying to make other white people wake the hell up, because this document is Executive Order 9066, signed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on February 19th, 1942, and that document is in the National Archives. You can look it up right now. You can read it right now, the minute you search it and click on the link. So in plain language, though, it authorized the forced removal of people deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast. So what did that actually mean in practice? Well, it meant this. In the next 6 months, approximately 122,000 men, women, and children were forcibly moved to assembly centers and then confined in isolated, fenced, and guarded relocation centers. This is starting to sound like 2026 all over again. But this time it's a more broad group. Anyway, nearly 78,000 of the evacuees were American citizens. So the government made no charges against them, nor could they appeal their incarceration. CNN did do a report on that. But let me say this again. 70,000 American citizens. No charges, no trial, no appeal. Does that remind you of something we've heard about the past year and a half? Just removed from their homes, ripped from their homes and businesses, and placed in camps in remote areas across 6 different states. So you guys, what ICE is currently doing, we have seen before, and that is what we're trying to tell you. Because let's talk about what happened to everything they left behind first. Let's start there. Because this is the part that connects directly to the post-war boom. The speed of the evacuation forced many homeowners, and businessmen to sell out quickly. Total property loss is estimated at $1.3 billion, and net income loss was at about $2.7 billion, calculated in 1983. Again, CNN, I believe, did the report on that one too. In today's dollars, that is between $2 billion and $5 billion in property. Gone. Just gone. Businesses that families had spent generations building. Gone. Farms that had been cultivated for a decade. Gone. Homes, savings, gone. A post-war survey estimated that 80% of goods and property stored with private non-government entities were ransacked, stolen, or sold while Japanese Americans were in those camps. 80%. So, and when the camps closed and the families came home, many of the newly released Japanese Americans returned home to find their belongings stolen or their property sold. They came home to nothing, you guys. Nothing. And during the exact years the GI Bill was being used and supposed to build generational wealth for everyone, but only white veterans to buy homes and build wealth, Japanese American families were literally starting over from zero. Okay? Not because of anything they did, because of a document signed by a president based on their ancestry. Okay, so this is also where the post-war boom connection becomes pretty direct. So the intermittent ended in 1945. The GI Bill was signed in 1944. Japanese American veterans, and there was many, including what? The famous 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which became the most decorated military unit in American history, came home to the same post-war America, okay, that white veterans did. But they came home to communities that had been destroyed, to property that had been stolen or sold off, to businesses that no longer existed, to farms that had been bought by speculators while they were being imprisoned. And they were supposed to use the GI Bill to start building the American dream. From what? From what? From the rubble of everything that had been taken from them? Now, what about reparations, right? Did the government make it right? What do you think? Because here's the documented answer. Congress provided $38 million in reparations in 1948. $38 million. For an estimated $1.3 billion in documented losses. That is roughly 3 cents on the dollar. So no, they didn't. And the requirements to claim even that were deliberately difficult. They did not make it easy. The former inmates were required to provide sworn testimony and to produce receipts and other proofs of their losses. The Justice Department strongly contested each claim using a legalistic definition of what could be counted as a loss. I'm going to get heated. It's the autism. It's my justice platform. I'm going to get heated during this conversation. You were imprisoned by the federal government. Your property was stolen or destroyed while you were imprisoned. And to even get a partial compensation, you had to produce receipts. You know how hard those were to come by back in those kind of days? From a home that you were given days to leave, to get no documentation out of and get it into hiding where it's safe. So it took until 1988, 46 years later, for the government to finally formally apologize. President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which officially apologized and authorized a payment of $20,000 to each former detainee who was still alive. The legislation itself admitted that the government's actions were based on, and I am reading directly from the law here on my script, and yes, I use a teleprompter app. I write my own scripts so I can make sure even if an 8-year-old can understand it. With that being said, I'm going to read this directly from the law. Race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. That is the United States government's own words about what it did. Okay, should I repeat that? Race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Their own words. In a law signed by a president on the public record. So while white families were using the federal programs to build generational wealth during the post-war boom, Japanese American families were rebuilding from forced dispositions with 3 cents on the dollars in compensation. In a formal apology that came 46 years too late for many of the people who actually deserve to be paid out during this. Well, let that sink in. Now let's talk about Latino Americans next. That's our next group. Specifically, Mexican Americans is what they were referred to at the time. Because this story connects directly to something you need to understand about right now. Especially with what's happening with ICE and detentions. So every time you hear politicians talk about mass deportation as a solution to economic problems, that's not a new idea. It has been tried before. During the exact years, actually, of the American dream. And it has a documented name. Operation Wetback. And that's not my language, you guys. That was the official name given to it by the United States government in 1954. So let's talk about what happened. Because in 1942, the United States was at war and needed agricultural labor. So what? The government created something called, I'm going to probably pronounce this wrong, the the Bracero program. It was a formal agreement between the U.S. and Mexican governments that allowed Mexican workers to come to America legally on temporary contracts to work in agriculture. So over the course of the program, approximately 4.6 million Mexican workers entered the United States legally under those contracts. They picked the crops that fed Americans, okay, during wartime and during the post-war boom. Now, here is what happened next. By the early 1950s, tens of thousands of U.S. service members were coming home to a post-war, recession, and immigrants were blamed for depressing wages and taking jobs away from American workers. From what I was able to research, that is exactly what happened. You invited them here to feed America during the war, to send troops to war, and then blame them? Our entire government's a damn narcissist. Anyways, it's the same playbook we're seeing in 2026. Struggling Americans being told that their problems were caused by the people working next to them that did not look like them. Not by the corporations paying poverty wages, no. Not by the policy decisions being made above them, no. By the immigrants who were invited over here to work. So on June 9th, 1954, the Eisenhower administration launched Operation Wetback. The short-lived operation used military-style tactics to remove Mexican immigrants from the United States. Although aimed at undocumented Mexican immigrants, some American citizens and legal Mexican immigrants were also deported. Does that sound familiar? So let me be precise about the numbers because this does matter. The government claimed at the time there was over 1 million people who were deported. Historians have since determined that the more accurate documented figure is closer to 250K to 300K deportations. So that's an enormous number of people still. But I want to give you the accurate numbers, not the inflated ones that are still being contested to this day, because that would not be right of me because you cannot fact check it. Because your ability to trust this series depends on me being as precise as possible. So thousands of U.S. citizens were also deported. American citizens were deported. Deported to a country some of them, if not the majority of them, have never even stepped foot in because they looked Mexican. We are literally repeating Operation Wetback right now in 2026 and last year, 2020. Come on, guys, wake up! Because this is the part that connects directly to the American dream narrative. The same corporations that were using Mexican labor throughout that program, the same agricultural interests that had lobbied Congress to allow that labor in, those same interests continue recruiting undocumented workers even during Operation Wetback. During the entirety of the operation, border recruitment of illegal workers by American growers continued due largely to the low cost of illegal labor and the desire of growers to avoid the bureaucratic obstacles of the, Bracero program. Read all of that or listen to that again, okay, very slowly. The government was deporting Mexican workers with military tactics. At the same time, American corporations were actively recruiting more Mexican workers across the border. Why? Because they were cheaper than American workers. And keeping wages low was more important than the stated goal of the operation. The workers were disposable, the cheap labor was not. That is a documented reality of Operation Wetback. It was not a crackdown on illegal immigrations to protect American workers. That's not what it was, and that's not what it is right now. It was a crackdown that served corporate interests while blaming workers for corporate decisions inside the United States. I can't believe that made my phone move. I'm a little pissed. Because we are literally seeing history repeat itself. Because inside the United States, anti-Mexican sentiment was pervasive in harsh portrayals of Mexican immigrants as dirty, disease-bearing, and irresponsible. It was the norm to refer to them like that. Those portrayals were documented and coordinated. They served a specific purpose, you guys, just like they are today in 2026. Keep American workers angry at the Mexican workers. It keeps them from looking at who is actually keeping the wages low. Now let's connect this to something happening right now, which I've already kind of mentioned, because this is not ancient history. The same language used to justify Operation Wetback in 1954 is being used today. Immigrants taking your jobs, immigrants depressing your wages, immigrants as a disease threat. This script has not changed, you guys, because the strategy has not changed. they're using the old playbook to keep working people fighting each other, keep them from looking up the chain of command to see who's actually pulling the strings. So let's bring this all together. In this episode, we covered 4 groups: Black Americans, Native Americans, Japanese Americans, and Latino Americans. And for each group, I showed you the same thing: specific documented federal policies running during the same exact time, in the same exact years the American dream was being built for who? White families. So let me line them up so you can see the pattern clearly. From 1933 to 1968, the federal government drew red lines on a map around black neighborhoods and used those maps to systematically deny mortgages and loans to non-white families. The GI Bill passed with language that appeared race neutral but was administered in a way that excluded 1.2 million black veterans from its benefits. Okay? Then you have 1942 to 1945. 122,000 Japanese Americans, including 70,000 American citizens, were imprisoned without charges. They lost between $2 and $5 billion in today's money and property. Okay? The camps closed. Japanese American families came home to nothing. During the exact years, white families were using federal programs to build generational wealth. From 1953 to 1968, the federal government terminated recognition of over 100 Native American tribes. They took 2.5 million acres of protected land and ended federal support for healthcare, education, and basic services on reservations. They ended all of it. All during the peak years of the post-war boom. Operation Wetback deployed military tactics to deport hundreds of thousands of people, including documented American citizens, while simultaneously, oh my gosh, I'm so worked up. While they were also the corporations using those workers and getting them over here illegally still across the border during Operation Wetback, and it still happened to this day. Okay? So before you ask, why has Trump not built the wall? Why is there nothing stopping our border? Because corporations need the work. Corporations need undocumented workers to keep wages low. That's all it is. So instead of blaming a family for coming over here to try and get a better life, how about we blame the corporations, the big corporations that are making that happen, that are literally tricking these people to come over here for low wages, that are literally the whole drive behind it is corporations. Think about that. Okay? Think about that, because I'm really pissed off right now. I'm trying not to show it. But this is what I want you to notice about all of this on this list. Every single one of those policies was federal. Every single last one. It was not individual racism playing out randomly across the country by everyday people. It was not cultural misunderstanding. It was not isolated incidents in specific regions. It is documented federal policy designed and implemented by who? The United States government. During the exact years, Americans were being told the dream was available to everyone who worked hard enough. Now, here's the second thing I want you to notice. Every single one of these groups was told the same exact thing, that their exclusion was their own fault, that their poverty was a result of their culture, that their struggles were evidence of personal failure, not evidence of systemic exclusion by documented federal policy like it actually was. And here's the third thing. The same people benefiting from the exclusion are the same people who are funding the narrative that blamed the excluded to this day. We document that all throughout the main series. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek to episode 3. We're going to talk about the Powell memo, the think tanks, the media voices, the scholars who funded to explain poverty as personal failure rather than policy outcome. That's all in episode 3. And it was not accidental. It was coordinated. Very heavily documented and coordinated. And this is why it matters right now more than ever. Today, you are being told that the problems facing working Americans are caused by immigrants, are caused by people on assistance, by affirmative action, by diversity programs, by everyone except the people making the documented decisions that shape the economy you are currently living in. There's the same script that justified redlining, the same script that justified Operation Wetback, the same script that justified terminating tribal sovereignty during the post-war boom, the same script that justified imprisoning American citizens without charges. The script has not changed. The playbook is still the same, because the strategy was not changed whatsoever. Keep working people divided. Keep them fighting each other. Keep them from looking at the documented record. because the documented record points somewhere else entirely to specific people, specific decisions, specific corporations, specific dates, all of which are on the public record that you can search, all of which you can verify and fact check yourself. The racial wealth gap is not a mystery. I just told you how it happened. It's a documented outcome of documented policy. Okay? And understanding that is not about guilt. Okay? I don't want white people to feel guilty for this who had no play in this, whether your ancestors did or not. It's not about blame between ordinary people. It's about accuracy. Because you cannot fix something you do not accurately understand. And right now, too many people are angry at the wrong people. And that's why I'm here talking to you on your screen. So here is where we leave this episode, this deep dive. We covered a lot of ground today. I talked a lot and I'm losing my voice. But I want to be honest with you about something before I close off this episode. This history is very heavy. It is not comfortable to sit with, and it shouldn't be. Okay? If you know me from TikTok, then you know Jose, the man who was ran over by ICE. That was the one person whose GoFundMe I was in charge of spreading awareness for and whatnot, right? And in one of my videos, I said his scream will haunt me until the day I die. And it will. And it's uncomfortable to sit with. And it should be uncomfortable, because the more we stay uncomfortable, the more we refuse to normalize this kind of horrific actions taken by our federal government. Because these were real people, you guys. They were not just numbers or statistics, for example. They were not historical abstractions. These are real families I am talking about who built real lives and then had them taken away or blocked by documented government policy. The black veteran who could not buy a home in Levittown. The Japanese-American farmer who came home to find his land sold to a white farmer. The native elder who watched federal recognition of his tribe dissolve in a congressional resolution that took less time to pass than it takes to read it. The Mexican-American family separated during a military-style operation to deport American citizens alongside undocumented workers. Those stories deserve to be told accurately, including what is happening today to those same groups. And it's not to make anyone feel guilty like you or I. Because guilt without understanding changes nothing. Let me say that again. Guilt without understanding changes absolutely nothing. But accurate understanding can change everything. Here's what the documented record actually shows. The wealth gaps we see today between white Americans and communities of color are not the result of cultural differences. They are not the result of different work ethics. They are the documented result of specific federal policies that ran during the exact years generational wealth was being built for only one group and systematically denied to others. And that's not my opinion or woke vibes. This is a federal record that you can fact check yourself. Available to anyone who wants to look. And here's the connection I want you to carry into episode 3. The same organized network we documented throughout episode 1 and 2, and we'll be going further in episode 3, the main series. Like I already gave you the heads up. I'll have the Powell Memo in there, the Business Roundtable, the funded think tanks and media voices. That network itself has spent decades making sure this history stays out of classrooms, out of mainstream conversations, because as long as a working class white Americans and working class Americans of color are fighting each other over who deserves what, the people at the top are never going to have to answer to what they took. That is the strategy. And understanding it is how you stop falling for it, you guys. Okay, the main series continues into that. And even in episode 4, I'm going to bring everything we have covered directly into present day. So episode 3 is going to be a little bit longer. I might do one more investigative deep dive like this video between episode 3 and episode 4. I'm probably planning on it, honestly. Because the documented connections between the historical decisions we covered and the headlines we're reading today is insane. And I'll see you there in episode 3.